Between 1880 and 1930, America's cities transformed. Vertical steel forests erupted from city blocks, reaching toward clouds that had never seen buildings before. Yet beneath every riveted connection, every triumphant photograph of a completed tower, lay a cost that nobody wanted to count. Thousands of men walked into construction sites and never walked out again. They fell from beams. They burned in fires. They were crushed by swinging steel. The skyline rose on a foundation of calculated indifference, where the price of a human life was always cheaper than the price of delay. How did a nation build its greatest monuments while accepting mass death as the cost of progress? And why were the men who paid that price so willing to do it? The answer begins in a world where ambition had no limits, but safety had none at all. Steel changed everything. Before the 1880s, cities climbed slowly. Stone and brick could only rise so high before their own weight crushed the walls below. But the Bessemer process transformed steel from a laboratory curiosity into an American obsession. Mills in Pittsburgh and Gary rolled out I-beams by the thousands, each one stronger than stone, lighter than brick, and capable of reaching heights that would have been impossible a decade before. The financiers saw a gold rush. The engineers saw a puzzle to solve. But the men who climbed those steel skeletons saw something else entirely. They saw a way to feed their families, and they saw a bargain with death that was baked into every contract from the start. By 1910, New York's skyline had become a race. The Singer Building stretched past 600 feet. The Metropolitan Life Tower climbed higher. Then came the Woolworth Building at 792 feet, a monument to ambition so grand that newspapers called it the Cathedral of Commerce. Each building demanded speed. Each speed demanded risk. Contractors bid against each other, not just on price, but on timeline. A floor a day, a tower in months. The faster you built, the sooner you collected your payment. The sooner you collected your payment, the sooner you could bid on the next project. Money flowed to those willing to push hardest, and push they did, right over the bodies of men who could not refuse. The workers came from places where choices were scarce. Irish and Italian immigrants packed into tenements from the Bowery to Hell's Kitchen. Jobs in factories paid starvation wages. Dock work was seasonal and brutal, but steel work paid. It paid enough that a man could send money back to the old country. It paid enough that a family might escape the tenements. It paid enough that young men would risk the incomprehensible heights and the constant threat of oblivion. Word spread through boarding houses and church basements. The work was dangerous, but the money was real. Men followed brothers and cousins and neighbors onto the rising steel, building invisible networks of trust hundreds of feet above the city streets. For the Mohawk men from Kanawake, the path to the skyline began with a treaty signed in 1794. The Jay Treaty allowed them to cross the border freely for work when others could not. By the 1920s, entire families traveled south to New York and stayed. Fathers and grandfathers left Brooklyn before dawn, driving through the night, then climbing into the sky as soon as the sun rose. One grandson remembers his grandfather saying, "Don't look down, don't look back. Trust your feet, and trust your brothers." Another remembers funerals that swept through Kanawake after the Quebec Bridge collapse in 1907, when 33 Mohawk men vanished into the St. Lawrence River in a single moment. The pain echoed for generations, yet the work continued. The skyline continued to rise, and the men continued to climb. The job itself demanded a kind of courage that defies easy explanation. Ironworkers balanced on beams just 8 to 12 inches wide, nothing but air on either side. Some carried lunch in one hand and tools in the other, striding across steel as if walking a sidewalk. Others moved in teams of 4, coordinating movements so synchronized that they seemed almost choreographed. The riveting gangs worked in a rhythm that was part industrial ballet, part survival instinct. A heater crouched beside a portable forge, fishing out rivets glowing cherry red at nearly 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. He tossed the rivet across open air, sometimes 20 feet, to a catcher balanced on a narrow beam. The catcher snagged the searing metal with tongs or a battered tin bucket, then jammed it into a hole where 2 beams met. A bucker braced the rivet from the other side with a heavy iron bar. A gunman fired a pneumatic hammer that could drive steel into steel with a deafening roar. All of this had to happen in seconds. If the rivet cooled too soon, if anyone missed their timing by even a beat, the whole sequence collapsed and the rivet had to be knocked out and the process started again. On a good day, a single gang could drive more than 500 rivets. Each one was a moment where skill and luck had to align perfectly. But there were no harnesses, no nets, no second chances. The only thing between a worker and the street was his own sense of balance and the trust he had in the men beside him. This was not a limitation of the era, it was a choice. By the 1920s, leather safety belts existed. They were crude and uncomfortable, with thick hand-stitched leather, heavy steel buckles, and hemp rope lanyards that frayed against sharp steel edges. They weighed up to 10 pounds and chafed the skin raw by midday. They rode up over the hips when a man fell, crushing organs or flipping him upside down. They snagged on rivets and caught under boots and threw workers off balance at critical moments. When contractors offered them, most workers refused. Not because they were brave, not because they lacked fear. They refused because the belts made the work itself more dangerous than working without them. A man needed unrestricted hip rotation and ankle flexibility to walk a 6-inch wide girder. He needed to move with precision, sometimes crouching low, sometimes stretching far out into empty space, redistributing his weight through techniques like the heeling move, where a worker hooked one heel over the edge of a beam and leaned far out into nothing, balanced only by the tension in his calf and the subtle counterbalance of his free leg. Any restriction threatened to throw off this balance and make a slip more likely. So the belts stayed unused, hanging on foremen's offices like relics of a safety system that did not work. What replaced them was something else entirely, a culture of total dependence on skill and on each other. The buddy system meant that no one set foot on a beam without a partner nearby. Union rules and crew tradition demanded it. If a man slipped or froze in fear, someone else was close enough to help, or at least to witness what happened. Apprentices learned to read the silent cues of the job. A tap on the beam. A hand signal flashed across the frame. A flat palm meant stop. A fist in the air meant danger. The wind drowned out voices, and distance blurred faces, so gestures became a language all their own. Older workers taught newcomers how to test a plank's flex with a heel, how to judge a beam's sway by feel, how to spot the signs of fatigue in a partner's eyes. Knowledge was passed down on the job, not in classrooms, earned in real time hundreds of feet above the city. This created a brotherhood that was fierce and unforgiving. Reputation mattered more than anything. A man who hesitated at the edge or reached for a harness too quickly might find himself labeled a coward. The word stuck harder than any bruise. The community depended on trust, and any sign of weakness risked not just your own isolation, but shame to your entire family. Yet this was not really about culture or courage. It was about economics. Contractors kept ledgers that treated death as a line item in a budget. Insurance policies covered accidental death, allowing companies to pay out after the fact rather than spend more to prevent disaster. In some years, a contractor could insure an entire workforce for less than the cost of installing nets across a single floor. By the 1920s, a leading New York firm quietly admitted that one worker died for every 33 hours on the job. That figure was not a scandal, it was a calculation. The math was simple. The cost of adding safety nets or slowing the pace for extra precautions always outweighed the expected insurance claims. When accidents happened, the process was efficient. A foreman filled out a report. The insurer cut a check. The job continued. Behind every number, there was a family left without a provider, but the men in charge rarely met the widows. They saw only the balance sheet, where speed and profit always came first. The disasters came with terrible regularity. On August 29, 1907, the Quebec Bridge's southern span buckled without warning. 75 men plunged into the St. Lawrence River as thousands of tons of steel twisted and collapsed in seconds. 33 of the dead came from Kahnawake, entire families shattered in a single moment. The official inquiry found that design flaws and ignored warnings doomed the bridge. Engineers had flagged bending steel weeks before, but the rush to complete the project sealed everyone's fate. The bridge collapsed again in 1916, taking 13 more lives. On January 9, 1912, fire broke out in the basement of the Equitable Building in Lower Manhattan and raced upward through wooden scaffolding and open stairwells, trapping workers on the upper floors. 7 men died, burned or suffocated or crushed as floors gave way. The building's steel frame held, but the interior was gutted. Official reports blamed the rapid spread on flammable construction materials and a lack of fireproofing. The coroner's inquest called for stricter codes and regular fire drills, but no laws changed. Insurance paid out the claims, and work resumed. The Golden Gate Bridge offered a rare exception. Chief Engineer Joseph Strauss insisted on safety nets stretched beneath the span. A first for American construction at such a scale. The costs were staggering. The nets themselves cost $130,000 at a time when a skilled worker earned less than $2 an hour. Directors grumbled about the expense, but Strauss argued for every possible protection, believing it would save both lives and time lost to fear. He was right. 19 men fell into those nets and survived. They became known as the Halfway to Hell Club, a name coined with gallows humor but spoken with relief. Ironworker Joseph Zampa remembered the sensation as being caught by a giant fishnet. The impact was jarring but survivable. Others described the rush of air, the blur of steel above, and the moment they realized they would live. The nets changed morale overnight. Men who once hesitated at heights now moved with steadier hands, knowing a second chance waited below. Strauss's gamble had paid off. 19 families were spared the telegram no one wanted, yet the Golden Gate remained an outlier. Most projects never attempted such precautions. The Empire State Building rose at a floor per day, driven by the same economics and the same indifference to risk. The official record lists 5 deaths during the 13 months it took to construct. Each death was logged with precision. For a site that employed over 3,400 workers and climbed 102 stories, the count stands out not for its scale, but for its scarcity. This was not an accident. Project managers enforced a level of discipline and oversight rare for the time. Daily safety briefings, strict crew assignments, a tightly scheduled flow of materials that left little room for improvisation. The building rose ahead of schedule and under budget, not by gambling with lives, but by taking safety seriously. Yet the lesson went largely ignored. Contractors on other skyscrapers still cut corners, skipping nets and harnesses to save time and money. The Empire State's record became an outlier, a quiet rebuke to an industry slow to change. Change came not from disaster, but from law. The Great Depression and the rise of organized labor forced a reckoning. Federal relief programs like the Public Works Administration began attaching safety clauses to every contract. Inspectors now demanded guardrails, nets, and harnesses on all federally funded sites. Department of Labor bulletins spelled out the rules in no uncertain terms. For the first time, federal money came with conditions, and those conditions saved lives. Safety was becoming a requirement for those willing to comply. It took until 1971 for real transformation. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration issued sweeping standards requiring fall protection for any worker more than 25 feet above the ground. For the first time, safety was not a matter of personal choice or crew tradition. It was the law. Inspectors could now find companies, shut down work sites, and hold foremen responsible for ignoring the rules. The old arguments about pride and experience no longer carried weight in court. Technology caught up with regulation. Lightweight synthetic webbing replaced thick leather. Shock-absorbing lanyards replaced hemp ropes. Full-body harnesses spread the force of a fall across the chest, shoulders, and thighs, cutting the risk of injury dramatically. Yet resistance ran deep. Veteran ironworkers, shaped by decades of risk and tradition, saw the new harnesses as a challenge to their craft. Some refused to wear them, even as fines mounted. OSHA's mandate did not erase the old code overnight. It did set a new baseline. Safety would be enforced, not negotiated. Today, construction remains one of America's deadliest jobs. Over 1,000 workers die each year, but modern safety gear saves thousands of lives. Every harness on a job site, every net stretched beneath a work platform is a reminder of the men lost before these rules existed. Their names are mostly forgotten now, absorbed into aggregate statistics, into lists of the dead that nobody really counts. But their sacrifice shaped a world where protection is no longer optional. The skyline we see today was built by hands and courage and an acceptance of risk that bordered on nihilism. The question now is whether we have truly learned the lesson or whether we simply hide the cost of progress in different ways. What risks do we still accept without questioning? What price are we still willing to pay?